someone saying to me, "Man, you're a critic of Donald Trump. You're gonna go to Erdogan's Istanbul? You might not make it back, bruh." And my and my editor was like, "I don't think we should do this." So my editor was like, "Well, why don't you just go interview some activists?" And I was like, "We're always extracting from these young folk. Let me try to write something for them." And so elsewhere was this attempt to kind of offer us uh, um, some insight in what we need to replenish. That we may not have the money to go overseas, and we may not have the will to experience the poverty that Jimmy experienced in Paris, or we don't have the resources to, rent a flat in London in Tedworth Square or be in Istanbul. But what Baldwin was trying to do was not to live in exile. He was just trying to find the distance so that he could understand the behemoth, so that he could make sense of this place. So we have to find our elsewheres. And what I say is that we have to find those communities of love that allow us to laugh full belly laughs, that will allow us to rage, right? To cuss at the top of our lungs. And those people who will sturdy our spines when our knees buckle, and allow us to be vulnerable so that we can replenish and re-enter the fray. We need to acquire the requisite distance so that we can see the operations of power and the temptation that we may face to take the bribe. Right? So we have to pull away, not become so um, taken with the awards and the accolades, right? To find the requisite distance so that we don't lose our voice, so that we can still speak the truth when our time comes to speak it, so that we can still bear witness. So I didn't want to say Baldwin was never in exile. He just found this elsewhere to speak the truth, to bear witness. And that's what we need to do. No Name in the Street, which is the spine of Begin Again. No Name in the Street is this, as he called it, this mighty motherfucker, as he puts it. Right? It's beating him down. And he hasn't finished the book yet at this moment. So he's wondering if he will ever finish it. But you're right, though, that loneliness, um, I feel it too. But, it is what it is. It's
Yeah.
73 million plus now. I think we're still at the crossroads. The election didn't resolve anything. I'm from the Gulf Coast. I'm from a small town called Moss Point, Mississippi. Country boy to the core. Um, and growing up on the coast, Tam, I know a little bit about hurricane. And the front end of a hurricane is very violent, very violent. It'll tear up the town. The eye of the storm is calm. You can walk out and assess the damage. You can try to reattach some boards, but it's an illusion because the tail's coming, and the tail is just as violent as the front end. We're in the eye of the storm. That's where we are. And so the goal wasn't the election of Biden and Harris. The goal is a more just America. They're just the moment to help us get there. And so 73 million are a lot of folk, and many of whom aren't committed to democratic norms. Many will not extend legitimacy to the Biden-Harris administration. Many will deepen their disaffection and alienation from the democratic process. We have to buckle up. And if we trade one fantasy for another, if we trade one fantasy for another, we will seal our fate. No, I think, the thing is that America is, we suffer not only from white supremacist ideology, but we suffer from an extraordinary degree of selfishness. I mean, the country there. I mean, wearing a mask is considered liberty. Not wearing a mask is considered an exercise of one's liberty. Government trying to enforce a mask mandate is somehow tyrannical, right? So there's a kind of selfishness that threatens the body politic, and white people don't have a monopoly on selfishness. White folk don't have it's not their possession to be concerned only with their 401ks and their retirement, their stock market portfolios and the like. So selfishness, right, is part of the mixture. Donald Trump sits at in the sweet spot of greed, selfishness, and racism. That mixture is his fuel, has been his fuel. And so when you see this kind of increase in the number of folk voting, you're going to see an increase in the support among various communities for folk who they think will benefit their self-interest. So just statistically, it makes sense that we're going to see an uptick in those numbers because we saw an uptick in the number of people who voted. It just makes sense in that regard. But selfishness is not the possession of white folks, right? We got some selfish black folk too.
Clearly.
Right. So love orients us to the world in such a way that we don't duplicate the very thing that we're condemning. It holds off an all-consuming rage. It keeps rage from morphing into hatred because there's nothing good there for you. Because if hatred takes root, then you too will become monstrous, right? And so there's a sense in which Baldwin is grappling. By the time they murder Dr. King, and he's like, they killed the apostle of love. What does it say about them? He's not naive about a harmful touch. He's not naive about the violence of human beings. But he says that this says something about who these folks are. And it shifts, because what you're noting here is the shift in his we, right? That he's not so much concerned about saving white folks as he is about trying to build a world where these noxious views have no quarter to breathe. And that sometimes expresses itself in a kind of an intense anger, right? And this is what I say to people who read Begin Again. You can't run past Jimmy's rage. The rage lights the kiln. And so you gotta deal with that anger. You can't move it away. And that anger is really important to understanding the shift between those two passages you just read. So that's the easy part, right? The mystical black bullshit is this idea that our blackness confers upon us some necessary ethics, some politics, some inherent connection to each other. That by virtue of being born black in the world, you automatically have a relationship with other black people. You automatically hold a certain kind of politics. You automatically have a certain kind of rhythm, a certain kind of style. Baldwin's like, come on, that's as if some metaphysical blackness swoops down and then and infests the baby, and then boom, you get black people. He's worried about this, and in some ways, he's challenging at that moment a certain kind of cultural nationalist position that presumes that black people, qua black people, are by definition, right, a certain kind of people, right? That our culture orients us to each other and to the world in particular sorts of ways, and that if you're not in line with that understanding of black culture, you're either an Uncle Tom, or you've sold out, or you are miseducated, or the like. And Baldwin wants to suggest here that kind of understanding of blackness flattens the complexity, the rich diversity of who we are. Because Jimmy wants to insist on this notion of individuality, but he doesn't want to invoke it and embrace that notion of individuality in such a way that he denies the cultural power of black communities. He just doesn't want us to get trapped, because that's just the category. We're just releasing the category and then we're boxing ourselves in, right? It's what he sees in the Nation of Islam, for example, in The Fire Next Time. They're just flipping the script, right? They're just turning it upside down, but they're not getting outside of the frame. So Baldwin is insistent that we understand ourselves in the broadest sense in the broadest sense possible, in the most expansive sense possible. That passage you read comes from an essay that he wrote. It's his letter of resignation from The Liberator, which was a black nationalist periodical that had been accused of anti-Semitism. And Ossie Davis had resigned from its board, and Jimmy resigned from the board. And what he was saying is that we can't become as monstrous as the folk we're fighting against. And then that's when he drops that line that almost brings me to tears every single time. I want us to do something unprecedented. and that is create a self without the need for enemy, right? And that means stepping outside of the frame of these categories that box us in. But it's not, I want to be very clear, it's not an embrace of some sentimentalist understanding of the universal human being. I don't see color. That's bullshit too, right? For Jimmy, right? That's not what he's suggesting by not falling in the trap. And 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 he's also not suggesting that to create oneself without the need for enemies also involves leaving behind the particular beauty of Black culture, right? He's not turning his back on that either. It's just how do we understand it? How do we render it in all of its complexity and fullness? You see.